When the stars went dark. The research station Meridian floated silently in the void between two dying stars. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation deck window, watching the distant glow of the Zephyrian homeworld. Just 6 months ago, that planet had been alive with millions of blue-skinned beings who could manipulate electromagnetic fields with their minds. Now, it was as dark as the space around it. Sarah pulled away from the window and walked back to her laboratory. The corridors of Meridian buzzed with nervous energy. Humans moved quickly from room to room, their faces tight with worry. They were the only species left manning the station. Every other race had either fled home or simply vanished. In her lab, Sarah found her research partner, Dr. James Park, hunched over a microscope. His usually neat hair was disheveled, and dark circles ringed his eyes. He had not slept properly in weeks. "Any progress?" Sarah asked, setting down 2 cups of coffee. James looked up and rubbed his temples. "The same results every time. The pathogen targets specific genetic sequences. It is like nothing we have ever seen before." Sarah sat beside him and pulled up the data on her screen. The plague had appeared 3 months ago, spreading faster than wildfire across the galaxy. It did not behave like any normal disease. It was selective, intelligent almost. It targeted certain species while completely ignoring others. The Zephyrians were the first to fall. Their electromagnetic abilities made them powerful but also vulnerable. The plague attacked the very genes that gave them their powers. Within days, entire cities went silent. Next came the Vrex Collective, insectoid beings who shared a hive mind. The plague severed their mental connections, leaving millions of individuals lost and confused before claiming their lives. The great crystal cities of Arcturus Prime, home to the energy-based luminals, flickered and died as their people dissolved back into pure light. Species after species succumbed. The proud warrior race of Dakari, the peaceful plant-like Thornians, the ancient and wise ethereals who had guided galactic politics for thousands of years. All gone, consumed by a plague that seemed to know exactly how to kill each race. "What about the other survivors?" Sarah asked. James pulled up another screen showing scattered reports from across the galaxy. The Kethani reptilian clans have lost about 60% of their population, but some are surviving. A few isolated Morganti traders are still alive. Some of the younger crystalline entities managed to shield themselves. Sarah nodded grimly. It was not much, but it was something. Still, the numbers were staggering. In 3 months, the galactic population had dropped from over 2 trillion sentient beings to less than 50 million, and humans had not lost a single person to the plague. "Why us?" Sarah whispered, voicing the question that haunted every human in the galaxy. "Why are we immune?" James shook his head. "I have run every test I can think of. Our DNA, our immune systems, our neural patterns. There is something about human biology that the plague cannot touch, but I cannot figure out what." A soft chime filled the lab. Sarah looked up to see Captain Rebecca Torres entering, her uniform crisp despite the chaos around them. Rebecca commanded the small fleet of human ships that protected Meridian Station. "Dr. Chen, Dr. Park, we just received a transmission from Earth," Rebecca said. "The Galactic Council is officially dissolved. The few surviving representatives are asking for human assistance in maintaining order." Sarah felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. The Galactic Council had existed for over 5,000 years, maintaining peace between hundreds of species. Now it was gone, and suddenly humans were being asked to fill the void. "What did Earth say?" James asked. Rebecca sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "President Martinez is calling for a full session of the Human Federation. Every colony, every station, every ship. We need to decide what comes next." Sarah turned back to her data screens. Somewhere in these numbers was the answer to why humans had survived. But even if she found it, would it matter? The damage was already done. Civilizations that had existed for millennia were reduced to scattered refugees and empty worlds. "Captain," Sarah said slowly, "have we heard anything from the Outer Rim? The research stations in dark space? Rebecca checked her tablet. Station Echo reported in yesterday. They found something interesting. Dr. Park, you might want to see this. James leaned forward as Rebecca played an audio message. The voice belonged to Dr. Anton Reeves, a xenoarchaeologist studying ancient ruins in the unexplored regions. This is Echo Station. We have made a significant discovery in the ruins on Kepler 442c. The structures here predate any known civilization by at least 50,000 years. More importantly, we found records. Whoever built this place knew about the plague. They called it the Gene Scythe. It was created as a weapon, but something went wrong. It spread beyond its intended targets and wiped out its creators too. The message continued with technical details, but Sarah had heard enough. She looked at James, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his expression. An ancient weapon, James said quietly. That explains why it is so precise, so targeted. Sarah nodded. And if it killed its own creators, that means even the most advanced civilizations could not stop it once it was released. Rebecca stood up. I need to report this to Earth immediately. If this is an ancient weapon, there might be more information out there, maybe even a way to help the survivors. As Rebecca left, Sarah and James sat in silence. The truth was both revealing and terrifying. Somewhere in the distant past, a civilization had created the perfect biological weapon. It had been designed to target specific genetic markers, probably to eliminate enemies while preserving allies. But weapons of such precision were double-edged swords. Sarah pulled up a new set of data, this time focusing on human genetic patterns. James, look at this. What if our immunity is not random? What if we are immune because we never existed when this weapon was first created? James studied the screen. You mean we evolved after the weapon was designed? Exactly. Every other major species in the galaxy has ancient roots. The Zephyrians, the Vrex, the Ethereals, they all evolved millions of years ago. But humans are young, cosmically speaking. We only reached the stars a few centuries ago. The implication hit them both at the same time. Humans were not superior or chosen. They were simply too new to be included in an ancient weapons target list. That means, James said slowly, we inherited a galaxy that was already damaged. We are not the victors, we are the cleanup crew. Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and responsibility. They had not won anything. They had simply survived by accident of timing. But that survival came with a burden. Every empty world, every silent station, every piece of abandoned technology now fell under human care. A new message appeared on Sarah's screen. It came from Captain Elena Vasquez, a linguist working with the remnants of the ethereal archives. Elena had been trying to decode the final messages left by various species before they fell to the plague. Sarah, I have been reading the last transmissions from the Zephyrian High Council. They knew they were dying, but they spent their final days not mourning or panicking. They were organizing. They left detailed instructions for maintaining their technology, caring for their young, even feeding their domestic animals. It is like they were writing a manual for whoever came after them. Sarah shared the message with James. The more they learned, the clearer the picture became. The advanced species of the galaxy had not just died. They had prepared for their deaths, leaving behind everything they could to help those who would inherit their worlds. They knew we would be the ones to find it, Sarah realized. Somehow they figured out that humans were immune. James nodded grimly, which means they died trusting us to take care of what they left behind. The responsibility was staggering. Humans had gone from being newcomers in galactic society to its inheritors in just 3 months. They now controlled technology they barely understood, worlds they had never seen, and resources beyond imagination. But more than that, they had inherited the survivors, the scattered Kethani, the isolated Morganti, the few remaining members of dozens of species. These beings looked to humans not as conquerors, but as protectors. Sarah stood up and walked back to the observation window. The Zephyrian homeworld was still dark, but she could see the faint lights of human ships beginning to orbit it. Soon those ships would land. Humans would walk through empty cities, study abandoned laboratories, and try to understand what they had inherited. James, she said without turning around, send a message to all human stations and colonies. Tell them we need every xenobiologist, every linguist, every engineer we can find. We have work to do. James smiled for the first time in weeks. What kind of work? Sarah turned back to him, her expression determined. We are going to learn everything we can about every species that died. We are going to preserve their cultures, their knowledge, their achievements. And we are going to help the survivors rebuild. That could take generations, James warned. Sarah nodded. Then we better get started. Outside the window, more human ships appeared, their lights cutting through the darkness. They carried scientists, doctors, engineers, and teachers. They came not as conquerors claiming prizes, but as guardians accepting responsibility. The galaxy had fallen silent, but it would not remain so. Humans would make sure of that. Picking up the pieces, 3 months had passed since the last transmission from a major alien civilization. Captain Marcus Rivera stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Pathfinder, studying the massive cityscape spread below them on the planet's surface. The Vrex Collective's capital world stretched as far as his instruments could detect, but not a single light flickered in those towering spires. Atmospheric readings show the air is still breathable, reported Lieutenant Commander Ana Santos from the science station. No signs of decay or contamination. It is like the entire population just stopped. Marcus nodded grimly. They had seen this pattern on 17 worlds so far, cities perfectly preserved, but utterly empty. The plague had been surgical in its precision, targeting only living beings and leaving everything else untouched. Dr. Vasquez, are you picking up anything from their communication networks? Marcus asked. Elena Vasquez looked up from her linguistic analysis station. Her team had been working around the clock to decode the databases left behind by extinct civilizations. The Vrex left extensive records, Captain. Their hive mind allowed them to share information instantaneously, so when they realized they were dying, they managed to compile their entire cultural and scientific knowledge into accessible formats. Accessible to whom? Asked Dr. Robert Kim, the team's xenobiologist. They could not have known we would be the ones to find it. Elena pulled up a holographic display showing ancient text patterns. That is the remarkable thing, Dr. Kim. In their final weeks, multiple species began creating what they called inheritance protocols, simplified databases designed to be understood by whoever survived. Marcus studied the display. The implications were staggering. As they lay dying, these advanced civilizations had spent their final energy creating gifts for the survivors. It was an act of hope that humbled him. Captain, interrupted Ensign David Park from communications. We are receiving a transmission from the surface. It is not coming from the cities. Put it through, Marcus ordered. A weak but clear voice filled the bridge. It spoke in accented, galactic standard, the trade language most species used for interstellar communication. Unknown vessel, this is Keth Tar Vess of the Southern Clans. We detect your ship above our world. Are you friend or foe? Marcus felt his heart rate increase. A survivor. After weeks of exploring dead worlds, they had finally found someone alive. This is Captain Marcus Rivera of the human vessel Pathfinder. We come in peace, seeking survivors, and offering assistance. A long pause followed, then the voice returned, sounding surprised. Humans? The warm-blooded mammals from the outer rim? You survived the gene scythe? Elena quickly accessed her translation protocols. Gene scythe was what Dr. Reeves had called the plague in his transmission from the ancient ruins. Somehow the survivors knew the same name. Yes, Marcus replied carefully. We are immune to the plague. How many of your people survived? Our clan numbers perhaps 300 individuals. We took shelter in the deep caverns when the scythe began claiming our people. Our isolation saved us, but we are alone now. The great hive cities are silent. Marcus looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. Keth Tar Vess, would you be willing to meet with us? We have much to discuss. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself sitting across from one of the most unusual beings he had ever encountered. Kethtar Vess stood nearly 8 feet tall with scaled green skin and large golden eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Despite his imposing appearance, his manner was gentle and thoughtful. They met in a small clearing outside the cavern system where the Kethani survivors had hidden. Elena sat beside Marcus, her translation device working overtime to bridge the gap between their languages. "Your people," Vess said in his careful galactic standard, "they were not part of the ancient galaxy. The Scythe did not know to seek them." Marcus nodded. "We believe that is correct. Humans evolved after the weapon was first created." Vess hissed softly, which Elena's device indicated was a sound of agreement among his people. The Eternal Archives spoke of this possibility. Before the Great Silence fell, the Wisdom Keepers predicted that new life would inherit the stars. Eternal Archives? Elena leaned forward, intrigued. "The collected knowledge of all major civilizations," Vess explained. "When the Scythe first appeared, the eldest species recognized it from ancient warnings. They knew death was coming, so they began the Great Preservation." Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "They preserved their knowledge. For us." "Not just knowledge," Vess corrected. "Culture, art, music, philosophy. Everything that made each species unique. They did not want their existence to be forgotten." Elena was already taking notes on her tablet. "Kethtar Vess, would your people be willing to help us access these archives? We want to preserve and honor what was lost." Vess studied them both, carefully. His golden eyes seemed to weigh their intentions. Finally, he spoke. "There is something you must understand about your inheritance, humans. This galaxy was not just destroyed. It was carefully prepared for transfer." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Vess gestured toward the silent cities in the distance. "The Vrex could have tried to fight the Scythe. Their technology was advanced enough. The Zephyrians could have attempted to shield themselves electromagnetically. The Ethereals possessed powers beyond physical comprehension." Marcus waited, sensing there was more. "But they did not," Vess continued. "Once they understood what was happening, they chose to spend their remaining time preparing rather than fighting. They knew the battle was already lost, so they focused on what could be saved." The magnitude of that sacrifice struck Marcus like a physical blow. Entire civilizations had accepted death in order to preserve something for the future. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Because," Vess said, "they recognized something in your species that gave them hope." Elena looked up from her notes. "What did they recognize?" Vess was quiet for a long moment, then pointed to the human ships visible in the sky above them. "When humans first reached the stars, how did they treat the species they encountered?" Marcus thought back to the early days of human space exploration. "We were curious, we wanted to learn, to trade, to share knowledge." "Exactly," Vess confirmed. "Most young species that achieve space travel become conquerors or isolationists. But humans became students. You sought to understand rather than dominate." Elena gasped softly as the implication hit her. "They trusted us." "The ancient texts speak of this," Vess continued. "The wise species watched human expansion for decades. They saw how you treated other races, how you approached conflicts, how you shared your own discoveries freely. When the Scythe came, they chose to trust that humanity would be worthy inheritors." Marcus felt the weight of that trust settling on his shoulders. It was heavier than any command he had ever carried. "Kethtar Vess," he said formally, "will you and your people work with us to honor that trust?" The Kethani leader stood and performed what Elena's device identified as a gesture of formal agreement. "We will help you become the gardeners of this galaxy's memory." Over the following weeks, the work began in earnest. Vess led them to hidden archives scattered across the planet, each one containing the preserved knowledge of different species. The Vrex had left detailed instructions for maintaining their biotechnology. The Zephyrians had compiled comprehensive guides to electromagnetic manipulation. The Ethereals had somehow encoded their philosophical insights into crystal matrices that humans could eventually learn to read. But more than technology, they found culture. Music from 100 different worlds. Art that challenged human perceptions of beauty. Stories that revealed the hopes and dreams of species that no longer existed. Elena worked tirelessly to catalog everything. Her linguistic skills, enhanced by Kithani translation techniques, allowed her to begin decoding the more complex cultural archives. "Marcus," she called out one evening as they worked in a converted Vrex laboratory, "you need to see this." She had accessed what appeared to be a collective message, recorded simultaneously by multiple species in their final days. "To those who inherit the stars," the message began, cycling through dozens of different languages before settling on galactic. "Standard, we leave you not just our achievements but our mistakes. Learn from what destroyed us. Build something better than what we created." The message continued with detailed warnings about the dangers of biological weapons, the importance of genetic diversity, and the need for civilizations to work together rather than compete. "It is like they are teaching us," Marcus realized. Elena nodded. "Not just about their technology, but about how to avoid their fate." As word spread through human space, more ships arrived. Scientists, doctors, engineers, and teachers came from every human colony. But they also brought something else: survivors. Small groups from dozens of species began emerging from hiding places across the galaxy. Some, like the Kithani, had taken shelter in natural formations. Others had used advanced technology to shield themselves. A few had simply been lucky, caught in places the plague could not reach. Each group brought their own piece of the puzzle. Morganti traders shared navigation data for hidden supply caches. Crystalline entities revealed the locations of knowledge repositories. Young Thornian saplings, the only survivors of their plant-based species, carried genetic templates for rebuilding their people. Marcus found himself coordinating not just human efforts, but the first interspecies cooperation since the plague began. It was challenging work, but also hopeful. For the first time in months, the galaxy did not feel completely dead. "Captain," Elena approached him one evening as he stood watching the sunset over the Vrex capital, "I have been thinking